Welcome. My name is Cynthia Hamilton, and I want to welcome everyone to our District 10 forum. And also want to thank Little Housekeeping, our ASL sponsors, Rev Up Texas, Deaf Interpreter Services, and Nicola Brandt for being with us tonight. Also want to thank the candidates for being here and taking their time to do this important session for us. But want y'all to know that there were several candidates that, knowing even that they could not get recognition for their contributions, contributed financially to make this effort possible. So we want to really thank everyone who made this possible tonight. So thank you for joining the partners in the Disability Vote this evening for Conversation 360, the Vote and Disability. This session is being recorded and will be posted to the Disability SA website, YouTube channel, and social media platforms following tonight's conversation. We are here tonight with candidates running in the District 10 City Council race, which will be held on Saturday, May 1st. The deadline to register to vote is Thursday, April 1st. If you do not live in District 10 and would like to move to a different room, please select the Leave Room option, and volunteers in the main room will assist you. We will begin with pre-submitted questions and then entertain questions from the floor if time allows. For this district, we anticipate being able to get through 11 to 12 questions. Let me remind the candidates of the forum guidelines, which were emailed in advance, and emphasize that responses directed at other candidates or in reference to other candidates will not be tolerated. You will receive a courtesy warning, but will be removed if perpetuated. And I've already spoken to both of you briefly, and I know that neither one of you would ever do that. So I want to introduce the two candidates that we have with us tonight are Ezra Johnson and Gabriel Gregory. And each of you will have 2 minutes to introduce yourselves, including why you are running for office and why the disability vote is important to you. And for this, we're going to begin with Ezra.
Well, thank you very much. It is an honor to be here tonight. My name is Ezra Johnson, and as was mentioned, I am a candidate for San Antonio City Council in District 10. I am an adjunct professor of law at St. Mary's University, where I teach Texas criminal procedure, and I'm also a state administrative law judge. I am also the immediate past vice chair of the VIA Board of Trustees, where I spent a term as the chair of the Accessible Transit Advisory Committee, where I worked with stakeholders in accessible transit and a citizens advisory committee to improve disability access and mobility in our public transit system. In that role, I shepherded a new contract for our disability transit service known as Via Trans and in doing so, improve the quality of that service such that complaints went down on our Via Trans service precipitously. So I have a track record of working with the disability community in order to provide a greater access to city services. And one of the reasons that I'm running, and one of the reasons why I am asking for the vote of this community, is because I want to take that experience and broaden it to city services at large. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. All right, let me turn it over to you, Gabriel.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you so much for having us here. I really appreciate everything that y'all do as an organization and group. I'm Gabriel Gregory. I'm running for City Council here in District 10 on the northeast side of San Antonio. I'm an Army Reserve officer, organizer, and service industry worker who is running for City Council because I believe it's time for a new generation of leadership, frankly, across the board, but especially here in City Council District 10. As I'm out on the doors listening to neighbors every day and have been doing so for several months now, I believe that folks across the political spectrum are ready for leaders who listen to them, who respond to them, who build relationships with them. Folks across the background, ethnicity, etc. spectrum want to see representation for all people. And we have not had that in District 10 for some time, almost 20 years, in fact. So I believe that there's an opportunity to push for COVID recovery and relief for working people, for homeowners and future homeowners, and for everyone in between. I believe that there's an opportunity to enact housing first policies that focus on keeping families in their homes long term so that we don't continue to see an increase in homeless population in District 10. And I believe that we can do more to support our veteran community, which in the purpose of this forum tonight, we see a lot of veterans with disabilities. I see them out on the doors here in District 10 as well. And I've learned a lot from those who have served in the district so far. So I believe there's a chance to move the district to a brighter future focused on representing everyone. And I hope that folks will listen to our solutions.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, I am going to start now with some questions that were pre-submitted, and you'll have 1 minute each to answer. And so we will start with Gabriel on this question. It's a little bit of a long question. So it says, currently, a lack of disability data impacts the ability to remove barriers for an equitable quality of life for those living with a disability. How would you work to ensure a disability identifier question is added to all city surveys, applications, and other forms where other optional demographic questions such as race, ethnicity, age, gender, LGBTQ identity, income are collected?
Sure. Well, if I recall from the questionnaire, I was even surprised to see that 13% of San Antonians are living with a disability. And I think that number is perhaps slightly higher, which is why I do support adding the disclaimer or the question to applications and forms, especially government forms, because I think that our leaders need to know who we represent in the community should we be elected. And if we are not taking those steps to identify folks, then there's a good hunch I have that folks aren't being listened to. And I think that it starts with identifying. So first, I do support it. And I think that we need to reach out and strengthen relationships with our county and our state officials. In this district, I've heard from several folks on the county and state level that the councilman in this district does not work to strengthen those relationships. And I think that we're missing an opportunity there, whether it's
Okay.
for
Time. Thank you. All right. Ezra, would you like for me to read the question again, or are you ready to go?
No, when I saw this question on the questionnaire, I was surprised that we weren't already collecting that data. And so, yes, San Antonio, we're talking about the need to increase access to opportunity and increase mobility. And that means both physical mobility and otherwise. We can't know what we need to plan for if we don't know who we are planning for. I will work with the city manager's office and the city clerk's office to make sure that we are doing a much better job of collecting data on our disabled community so that we can make informed decisions. It shouldn't be a matter of just assuming that we are reaching out to the right people if we don't know who they are.
Great. Thank you. Okay, and the next question, and Ezra, we'll start with you on this one. How do you see your district office working better with our disability community on the city level?
Well, to start with, physical access again. Right now, the district office in D10 is not what I would call accessible. It's not inaccessible on a transit route. It requires several layers of effort just to get up to the office. The first thing I'd start with is move the office or work to move the office in a place that's more accessible to everyone. And that would help people work with the office. I think even in the age where we are doing more remote meetings, I think it's important for people to have actual access to their council office and to be able to work with us eye to eye. One of the things I did when I was the chair of the VIA Transit Advisory Committee was actually work with groups like the Alamo Council for the Blind. We need to be able to bring those folks in and talk to them. And that's how I think the district office can improve working with that community and access. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good. All right. And Gabriel?
Yes, thank you. Well, first things first, I actually agree with Ezra that the District 10 office should be relocated. And not only because I don't feel that there's much accessibility, but also because I don't personally think it's very central to District 10 residents, in my opinion. But and I think I mentioned this in the questionnaire, I believe that the people we represent need to attend more meetings for the groups of folks that we represent. So if I'm on council, I'm going to be attending those disability access office meetings and try to extend a hand to organizations out there that like you that try to provide resources and educate others on policy and what we could be doing to bring that representation forward. So day one, I'd like to have a meeting with a leader like you to discuss what we need to implement and how I can help.
Thank you. All right, and question number 3, we'll start with Mr. Gregory. With a third of the population struggling with learning differences, it strikes home to see this brushed under the carpet year after year, especially so since TEA listens to our community leaders, yet there is no mention of it or raising awareness for it. Education and employment being a key part in breaking the cycle of poverty and homelessness in the disability community. So the question, how and when will dyslexia be recognized and celebrated within our community?
Sure. Well, first, I mean, we have, like you said, we have to recognize that this is not so much a problem in a negative way that some folks view it. We need to make sure, again, that we're representing everyone. I went to St. Mary's on the west side, and there are a lot of folks there, for example, who have a language barrier. And I would view this situation similarly. I believe that we need to, one, recognize that folks out there need a little bit more assistance, and that's okay. I would partner with our education professionals to see what the city can do to connect on that issue as well. But to your point about the intro of the question, right? I think that housing first policies and COVID relief to people who are struggling the hardest, which include a lot of folks who live with disabilities in District 10, would be a huge help to folks who are struggling right now in light of the pandemic. And we need to recognize that would be extremely helpful.
Thank you. And Mr. Johnson?
Well, I would start out by saying that, my grandfather was dyslexic, my father is dyslexic, my brother is dyslexic, and I saw, firsthand what it's like to work through a system that is not geared toward assisting folks with and accommodating different learning styles and different ways to learn. But by the time my brother was going through school with me, there had been a sea change, and that has continued. I don't know why people aren't talking about it. As a former public school teacher, I sat in on many boards where we were talking about what we could do for students to address their unique learning styles. And I would continue to tell those stories, tell the success stories. My brother, certainly all of my family have been very successful because of timely interventions, and so I would continue to raise awareness of that through those stories.
Great, thank you. Thank you. I am going to go to some of the questions that, bear with me a second. Those were the ones that were submitted specifically for District 10. And we have some additional questions that were presented. In a moment. Why do I have those? While I am looking for those questions, I'm going to, in the chat, if any of our participants here tonight have questions that you would like to ask of our candidates, if you want to put those in the chat section.
Cynthia, I can help monitor that for you.
Thank you. I need to go to the printer and get off where I printed those extra questions. Thank you, Isaac. I'll be right back. All right. Did we have any questions that came through? Let's see here. All right.
I don't see any.
Yeah.
All right. We did not. So I am going to proceed to. All right. Here is one that currently VIA paratransit services cover only those living within 3/4 of a mile of a traditional bus line, and ride-sharing options are not accessible. Dependable transportation is a huge part of the difference in getting and keeping a job and/or getting an education to get the qualifications for employment. What legislation, policy, or use of city resources would you champion to influence the expansion of accessible, affordable, and efficient transportation options for those living with disabilities outside the mandated VIA Trans service areas, especially when looking outside 1604 in unincorporated cities within the city limits, more rural areas of the city, and those without bus lines? That is, that's a lot.
That is quite
there.
a question.
That is
quite a question.
That is a lot in that. And I believe this is Mr. Johnson that begins.
It is my turn. So again, I'm the immediate past vice chair of the VIA board, and accessible transit was one of the things that I worked on. So I can talk about this for way more than a minute, and that question really does deserve way more than a minute. What I will say is this: based on what VIA does and how we have to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act, I think the best use of city resources is getting Prop A passed, working on our affordable housing, and making sure that every single city affordable housing project is on an existing bus route. So that way, accessibility is never an issue for public transit. And the other thing that VIA has done is that we have a Uber or Lyft-like service, which is like, it's ride share. It's very similar to ride share that is accessible to folks with physical disabilities. And we're going to expand that all throughout the city, or VIA is going to expand that all throughout the city. So between those two policies, that's the quick and 1 minute answer of what we can do. If anybody wants more detail than that, I am happy to. There are many ideas I have on that, and happy to talk about that in another opportunity.
Great, thank you very much. And Mr. Gregory, I'm going to add like 20 seconds to yours on that. So
thank you.
No, it's no problem. I have not much more to add than Ezra on this one. I'm in complete agreement with him, and I think that what the city has done to expand VIA is absolutely a great thing. You know, I would like to point out, you know, the agreement with him that we should be expanding VIA rideshare and VIA trans services. And I've spoken with folks already at the door who have told me, well, one in particular who has told me herself that she just doesn't get around anymore. And I was able to let her know about some of those programs. So I am thankful to all of the folks who have helped, you know, elevate those programs in the city. I mean, Ezra's one of them. I agree. Other than that, I don't have much to add. Specific to that question, I could get a little deeper about specific groups like veterans, but I won't go there on this answer.
all right, thank you very much. Another question that was submitted, and Mr. Gregory, we will start with you. How do you see yourself being a role model for kids or adults with disabilities, especially looking for work, trying to build trust in adults, tell us a little bit about how you see yourself as a role model and leader who is paving the way toward independence for youth and adult with disabilities in the San Antonio community.
Sure. Well, first things first, I think that just by having my name on a ballot right now is inspiring to some younger folks out there who may feel, whether they are living with a disability or not, that they do have a spot in our politics, and that they too can run for office and have a seat at the table and push solutions. As for folks who do live with disabilities, I think that being a councilman that's inclusive would be a start, highlighting these issues as important, which I don't feel have been highlighted in District 10 for some time. I mean, this councilman did not support expanding VIA and said that publicly and railed against it and its impact on the city overall. So I think that by strongly supporting what people living with a disability in San Antonio need, based on lived experiences, would be a start, and then representing them based on that.
Great, thank you. Mr. Johnson.
Gosh, I really don't have a good answer for that question. It's a great question. What I will say is this, though. When I was on the VIA board, we have citizens to be heard. And for the first year that I was on the board, almost all of the citizens to be heard were folks who were, had a disability and used VIA Trans and made the trouble and the effort to come physically down to the boardroom and say how the system wasn't working for them. We listened to what they were saying. And after a year, we were able to change that contract, get a new vendor in there who was much better able to meet the needs that were described to us. So that's what I think I can bring. I already have a track record of listening to folks and their needs and their concerns and making change that causes improvement. And the last thing I'll mention is, again, what we worked with stakeholders to make sure that all of the sensitivity training that was part of the old contract became a part of the new contract. That's what I can offer. I don't know if I inspire anyone to do anything, but what I can offer is my experience of actually listening and making change for the better.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to add a preamble to this next question. People with disabilities are an often overlooked economic force. They are, if I remember my facts correctly, like the third largest demographic with expendable income in the United States. And I think they're often overlooked as a voting constituency as well. And so this question asks, what is being done to educate the disabled population about voting? I'd like each of you to share where you see opportunities for partnering with the country to work toward increased voter turnout from the disability community. And Mr. Johnson, we'll start with you.
Well, I think it starts with outreach. What I've learned, especially in this campaign, is that there's too much passivity in our public education and outreach. We've fallen into a bad habit of saying, I put this information out on the internet, it's there for anybody who wants to go get it. Therefore, I've done what I need to do in terms of public outreach and education. What was clearly demonstrated to me in a recent experience with the freeze in February is that doesn't cut it. We have to be actively going out and we have to actively reach out to people to let them know what these resources are. Certainly voting is being shown of late to be of a special importance, and I am committed to using the platform of my office to get more information out there to the disabled community about voting and access.
Great, thank you. Mr. Gregory?
Yes, well, first, I've been thinking similarly to Mr. Johnson. I think that when I go out there and speak with folks, they don't know there's an election happening. And I think that's partly because our elections fall in May instead of coupled with the presidential cycle. And I think they should be coupled with the presidential in San Antonio. If I were elected, and whether I'm elected or not, I'm going to advocate at the state for a mandatory civic engagement class in our schools, because it affects all of us. And I think that whether you're a representative on the local level or higher, you should be advocating for those who are coming up and growing up in our school system to know what civic engagement is, rather than just teaching to a test and getting definitions in court cases. And then I want to partner with groups like Move Texas that are really the experts on this. In my first few weeks, I've said before, I want to meet with the leadership at Move to figure out how we can improve voter registration in District 10 for all people.
Great, thank you. Isaac, do we have any questions in the chat?
I have not seen any come across.
Okay, I don't. Great. All right. Next question, and we are with Mr. Gregory beginning. What steps can we take so that every building and sidewalk is wheelchair accessible? Please share your vision or plan for moving San Antonio toward a day when every building and sidewalk are accessible to those using mobility devices to get around our community.
Absolutely. Well, first, I definitely think there's room for improvement here on the city level to make sure and enforce that, particularly as I've learned in District 10, apartment complexes are following ADA guidelines and standards. Several of the apartments that I've knocked doors at do not have disability parking. They don't provide ramps in certain locations that obviously need them. And so I think that citizens in District 10 should absolutely be invited to reach out to the council office if they're struggling with that. And I reference that because I've spoken with someone at a complex in District 10 who was upset because they've been fighting to get ADA parking spot available and they couldn't. And so that made me think, well, we need to first represent all people and make sure that folks with a disability can reach out to the office, and we'll connect them with the right folks or connect ourselves to get what they need.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson?
Yes, certainly I've seen examples all over the district and the city where the accessibility on the street level is atrocious. I've audited transportation planning courses. It starts with planning. It all starts with planning. If the planners are not in the mindset of how is this going to be accessible for everyone, then what you're going to see, the final product, is not going to be accessible. I am committing, my council office to work with the city manager's office and work with the planning department to make sure that we continue to put disability access in the front of the planning process rather than trying to clean up on the back end. I think that's where we can make the most difference.
Great, thank you. We're getting through a lot of good questions here, and really appreciate the answers that both of you are giving. So what can we do so that there are healthier food choices in our stores and restaurants? And can we open restaurants with healthier choices? Oh, this is from the West Side. Okay, the obese rate here on the West Side is high. Please share what policies, programs, or incentives you would put forward to ensure there are healthier food choices at our local restaurants. So these are questions that were obviously submitted that were beyond, that were more, but I think we could all say that this is an issue that affects every district in some way, maybe some districts more than others, but it is certainly something from a health standpoint that we see everywhere. And so, Mr. Johnson.
Well, I hate to disappoint the person who asked the question, but the city's jurisdiction on the issue of restaurants specifically would be quite limited. There are, the federal government has imposed some notice requirements in terms of calorie counts on menus that generally don't apply to smaller organizations. Certainly, we could look into perhaps whether or not there's a preemption issue on whether or not the city could do something like that. I'd certainly be willing to research that. further, but I suspect that that is preempted by state law, but I would have to find out.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gregory?
Yeah, I mean, Ezra is absolutely right. There's not an immediate response that comes to mind, and that the city could do a whole lot about this issue. But I have spoken with folks, particularly in District 10, who have told me that they didn't used to have a grocery store, now they do. So it seems that there have been spots that I don't know if I'd classify as a food desert, but that did not have the convenience of a store, and that those spots have since improved, which I know is not the case for a lot of other parts of the community here in San Antonio, such as the West Side. So I'm with Ezra on this. I think that we don't have a whole lot. If there are people out there who say, hey, there are things you could be doing as a city, I want to hear from them. And if there are people who are struggling with this issue, I definitely want to see what organizations and organization leaders are out there to bring them to the table and see what we can do.
And I don't want to interrupt the flow since this has
That's
been
okay.
so successful, but it's something that occurred to me, and I hopefully Mr. Gregory can respond as well. Our Metro Health Department is underfunded. One of the goals of Metro Health is to teach healthier habits in general to the community at large. So outside of the specific issue of restaurants, I certainly think that our Metro Health Department needs more funding. I would say that much. So I'm sorry. Sorry to interrupt the flow.
No, this is great. The flow is going well, and I do like the ability, since both of you are doing your own timekeeping and staying within that. Mr. Gregory, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I agree. And on this issue and all the others, I think that we need to advocate to the state and our federal officials. So if this is an issue that comes to light in District 10 a little bit more than it is now, or that I've encountered, then I would definitely figure out solutions to advocate for.
Okay. I'm going to go to another question on VIA and transportation. Is transportation safe? And talking about VIA and VIA Trans. Talk to us about where you see opportunities to improve city oversight of local transportation options to ensure the increased safety of riders. So, Mr. Gregory, we're just gonna keep with the flow going here. Since you spoke last, I'll let you go first this time.
Sure. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is bike lanes, and I've spoken with a few folks who are avid bikers, cyclists here in District 10, and they've referenced encounters they've had on the road where they almost get hit. I don't know if that's relevant to a bus or some other vehicle, but I definitely believe we need to be expanding our bike lanes. And some of the projects that we see developing, such as the road project on Thousand Oaks currently, I wonder if the bike lanes were taken into consideration during the planning process. And so I'd like to see that as we move forward with any potential projects, that bike lanes and really all groups of folks, whether they have a disability or they don't, are taken into consideration to mitigate potential causes of harm.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Johnson.
Sure. Well, if you look at the numbers, VIA is one of the safest public transit systems in the country. No one should feel that they're not being adequately looked after when they're on a vehicle that's operated by VIA. Not only do we have a transit police department, but all of the buses have multiple cameras. And so safety is definitely a top priority, because if people don't feel safe, they won't use the service. And VIA always wants to make sure that people feel safe. The city does have oversight authority. The city appoints 5 of the 10 VIA board members and has a hand in appointing the chair. So the city already has a substantial oversight authority over our public transit system.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question about that one, because about the VIA thing, there is a driver that, I don't understand why they had a mask below their nose and not above it. I've seen a lot of these drivers have it. Even the cab drivers use the same thing too. And one guy stopped in the middle of the street. I was kind of middle of the street, get a cage in the middle of the street, and took me home. And I thought that wasn't right. I thought it was not even right at all. And I'm like, what is his mess like below his nose? I'm like, really? And one guy got in his van, like, why'd you get in the van for a guy no mask on his face? I'm
So,
like,
so that's great. That's a great thing to bring up, and that will give me a question. So, as council person for your district, a constituent comes to you and says, "I see this going on." How would you recommend that they address that issue, or how would you help them address that issue, Mr. Johnson?
Sure. Well, I can certainly refer the questioner to VIA's customer service department, who address issues exactly of that nature. And it certainly as the council office, we could do that ourselves, since I know who would be the point of contact there. And if there's a concern that operators are not using masks properly, I think that is something that should be brought to the attention of the authority. And I'm sure that they would want to address that if they knew that it was occurring. So that's how I would respond to that particular issue.
Great, thank you, Mr. Gregory.
Yes, my response wouldn't be too much different, but I will add that I do think we need to implement a policy that requires council offices to get back to constituents within 24 days. I think, frankly, it should be 14 days, even if that is just a follow-up. We've received this. Here's your next timeline for when you're going to hear back from us. And I know that there's been a backlog in District 10, or at least folks that I've spoken with who reached out and didn't hear anything back, or it took forever to get something back. And so one of the things I'm also doing to mitigate that is on this campaign, providing my number to every single person that we contact, whether it's on the doors or otherwise, so that they have a direct line to me should I be elected. And if they're really, really frustrated, I'm more than happy to answer their text personally.
Great, thank you.
And
So
at this point, I'm sorry, at this point, I really have to jump off. I've got to go teach class. I want to thank everybody for the opportunity. And I apologize for the conflict, but I really have to jump off.
We appreciate your making the time and working it into a very busy schedule. So thank you very much for joining us.
Very good. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good
great
night.
So I'm going to take a moment. Is there anyone else who has a question? You can either put it in the chat or don't see anything in the chat. All right, Mr. Gregory. This is a question relating to our deaf and hard of hearing community. And it's a little bit long. How are you going to educate the hearing community and general public to include clear, effective communication for the deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind communities in general living and workforce in San Antonio? So understanding there is a tremendous need for public education about various disabilities, especially around the deaf and hard of hearing community, I'd like you to spend a minute outlining how you would go about creating awareness for and advancing public attitudes about disability and those who are deaf, hard of hearing, or have other communication barriers within your district.
Sure. Well, I'm going to be a little vulnerable here, which, in my opinion, you don't see candidates do very often. I'll be honest with you. I have been friends with people with disabilities growing up, and I'm honestly, in retrospect, regretful that I didn't, find out more about what they go through, what they need. And I think that as someone who's running to represent an entire community potentially, that one of the first things I need to do as someone who does not have the answers to this, to these particular issues we're discussing on the call, I need to meet with the folks who do. I need to meet with the leaders of these organizations and organizations like you to figure out where we're neglecting and what I need to know in my position and how we can better educate the community. And I say that because I think folks are tired of having people that presume the answers or presume answers based on personal experiences. I think we really need to do more listening to people that are living through these experiences and who are affected to then, give them the resources they need.
Very good. Thank you.
And I'll let Cynthia reword this if she feels the need, but based on what you just said, I have a question. You said that obviously these organizations are going to be very key in that. Do you have any plans set out to help these organizations? As obviously many are struggling during this time with donations, not being able to hold events and stuff.
Sure. Well, and I feel you there, not only from this campaign, but also from other organizations that I'm connected to. They're struggling with fundraising and events. I think that there's definitely a sense across the board right now due to the pandemic of people who are kind of ready to get back out there, but have grown as a sense of, I don't know, whether it's laziness, just they're kind of in a shell right now until society gets back on track. But specific to organizations like yourself, I think that that goes in part with, sitting down with you and listening to you. What are your needs? How could a council office help you organize an event, get people to an event, raise some money if that, as long as we do it legally. I honestly don't have a particular plan as it relates to that part of the question. In terms of how we can better organize, I think it's listening to and inviting and listening to our leaders in this field. I think I referenced in the questionnaire, similar, relevant, but not exactly to your question, that we could do more to partner with ISDs and our education community so that students are more aware and educated about the Americans with Disabilities Act and what those needs in the community are for all people. Because like I said, I didn't grow up with that education myself, and I'm sure that other candidates across the city would agree with that. And so I think it's important for me to really listen to you and what your needs are and how we can help. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but
No, you're good.
I think rather than giving you a fake plan like I've seen others
Yeah.
do in the past, I'd rather just tell you, hey, let's meet, and you tell me how we can help and see what we can do.
Here's a question that relates to employment. And I'll read the beginning of the question, but it starts, employment is difficult to obtain. What jobs are available to disabled and non-disabled people, and why are jobs hard to get right now? So it gets, with 13.2% of San Antonians living with a disability, I'd like to hear your thoughts on some targeted efforts you would put into place to ensure there is equitable access to the workforce development programs that are helping to elevate the education and skill sets of our residents for greater levels of employment.
Sure. Well, first, what comes to mind is I've spoken to friends recently on the campaign who have disabilities, and they've told me that it's hard out there for them, that their experience gaining employment has been tough. And I'm listening to that, and I'm thinking, what can we do? And some of the things they have suggested is making sure that businesses, particularly new businesses, younger businesses that are just starting out, have all of that information regarding the ADA, so that workforce, what's happening in the workplace is fair, and that those owners can be held accountable. The stories I've heard about harassment and discrimination are uncalled for, and frankly, I'm surprised that I've heard as much as I've heard. So that's one point, but I'd also like to point out that I think that we just need to make sure that the city is inclusive in our workforce plan. We know that the workforce development plan, while I support it, while it was on the ballot, was not a complete plan. And so what I'd like to do is see where we can improve and make sure that folks who are often at a disadvantage, have maybe not a quota, but that we are taking them into account and providing them with the resources they need, especially if they've gone without work for so long.
I don't know that it's necessary to keep you at 1 minute, but this way we get as many questions in as we can. We are really, Isaac, do you have any more, or does anyone, any of the other participants have any questions? Keep checking in.
I'm good.
All right, let me go back and see. So this is a question on resources. Let me read this question as is. How is a disabled child supposed to have accommodations made to his government-funded home now that he is in a larger wheelchair? Please tell us about the initiatives, programs, or policies you would initiate to ensure low-income families have access to resources that support accommodation renovations to government supplemented housing, if any.
That one I do have enough information about to where I could go a little longer, but I don't. I think that would require a longer answer than a minute as well. So I want to revert back to what I mentioned earlier about the concerns I've heard about ADA parking, or about disability parking and other accommodations. I've been to places that don't have elevators or any other means other than stairs, no ramps, and I think that the city needs to partner again with the county and state to identify those and fix them. I also think that as we develop and we know we're going to grow another 1 million people in the next 10 years, it looks like we're on that track for good for now. We need to be partnering with the federal government as well to see how we can implement those requirements and those needs as we continue to develop. Ezra did point out one of the things that we do agree on, and we don't agree on everything, but we agree on this one, that as complexes and housing development continues, we do need to have access to public transportation and expand those via trans services and rideshare services so that all people have easier access and hopefully don't have to wait very long. Because I know that some of my friends who do live with a disability don't have the ability to wait an hour and a half at times to, or at least not so comfortably, for the next bus to come around or the next service to come around. I could expand on that. I think veterans is a big one. As we take into consideration the veterans who live here, we need to make sure that they have what they need. And that goes for all folks. Really, I think that honestly, the short answer probably to every question on the forum is that initial meeting is so important with you and with other leaders in the disabled community, because if the council isn't hearing those to address what those needs are, then we're not going to implement them. But I do think that what's most important is that we're thinking ahead about the needs that that we're going to face, not just now, but also in the future, so that we can be on top of it.
I'm going to ask you to talk for 2 minutes. You've mentioned veterans several times. I would like to hear, what your biggest concerns are for veterans and what your ideas are for improving what they're going through.
Sure. Well, this is just going to be a general answer for veterans overall. I think that we are Military City USA, but that shouldn't be just treated as a tagline. We've seen Military City USA signs pop up around town, and I don't think that actually makes an impact on veterans and families, military families that are struggling right now. We've seen an increase in active duty military families in the food bank line. And I think that should never happen really to anyone. But in my personal opinion, especially those who are making that commitment, some of whom have gone on several deployments in this country, to overseas deployments. One of the things I'd like to do that is unique that I haven't heard before is open up a workforce opportunity for currently serving reserve and guard members, enlisted reserve and guard members. I have soldiers in my platoon who have been in the Army for 4+ years and are highly trained in certain fields, and they're not competitive in the market. And I think that's similar from what I've heard about folks who live with a disability. And so anywhere we can identify those groups, and it goes back to identifying people that are living with a disability, people who are veterans, as someone pointed out on one of the breakout rooms, that I was in, so that we can accommodate them. And we need to be connected with those individuals as a council office. We need to know who they are. We need to maintain that record, and we need to make sure they can reach out. But if we have a program that we can plug more folks who honestly are not making ends meet, and even with the reserve and guard check every month are still not making ends meet, we can make sure that they're competing in the market. But healthcare, mental health care should not be a struggle. We need to expand partnerships with county, state, and federal officials. Really bring everyone to the table. I'm telling you, across the board, and this, I'll end it with this on this answer. I think across the board, and this is what I tell people, no matter what the question, no matter what the issue, what people are tired of in our leaders right now is that they're not listening. They're presuming answers. What I'd like to do is bring people to the table physically in the office and say, look, this is what we're discussing today. What do we need to do? What can we improve on? What are we neglecting? And what do we need to do about it? And I think by starting with that simple question, we can actually accomplish a lot more.
So I am going to interject a question in here. Back when SA 2020 was being developed, there were these 11 kind of initiatives, ideas, concepts, goals for the city in these 11 different areas. At the time, some of the funders, the foundation funders in town, when nonprofits would apply for grants, they would want to know, where do you fit into SA 2020? And they graded you on that. Well, for the organizations that serve people with disabilities, the word disability was not in the document at all. And so you had to make it fit into community safety or healthcare or youth and development. And so one of our concerns has been in developing, SA Tomorrow, some of these others, that people with disabilities have not been brought to the table to specifically discuss what their vision is for San Antonio as being the #1 place that people with disabilities want to live, work, and play. How could you help make sure that going forward, issues surrounding disabilities are always included in the planning process?
Well, one, by actually doing it. I think that, I've learned something on this call. I did know that there's not a lot of wording and language, and that pertains to a lot of folks in different communities in the city. Our LGBT plus community, our Black community. I just had a conversation with someone else at a rally the other day who was talking about language in our city charter, language in our programs. We're neglecting entire groups of people in the language that we put out as a city and in our planning language. So I think that no matter what that language is, it needs to be included. People need to know that they are being heard, that they're being addressed, their needs are being addressed. But also, you just pointed it out. If the city took the time, and if our officials and if the councilmen took the time to sit with folks from various communities, we would probably have that language. But my hunch, and I'm not for certain on this, my hunch is that that has not been done enough, or we would see that language exist already. But I'm not sure what we could do other than just making sure that as a councilman advocate for those changes. And if they are able to be changed, they should be changed. If they are still relevant. I know some of that has phased out already, but like the SA 2020 stats that continue to come out in partnership with SAM Ministries and other organizations that release those, if anything needs to be changed there, I'd definitely be interested to hear what those are, so that I could advocate to change them and to include people with disabilities in those and really highlight them. And I want to point out, this is a neglected part of the community. And it's not until recently that a few things locally have been addressed. And so I not to copy Ezra's answer on buses, but there are some groups that are more vulnerable and that should be addressed at the front of the line so that there's not this continuous backlog. I think that we need to recognize that those challenges are often a little bit harder as well. If we're going to talk about implementing ADA standards across every functioning building in San Antonio, we know that that's not actually happening. That takes a lot of work. We should probably begin addressing that and planning for that now rather than waiting to address it later.
I am curious, when you mentioned some of the inaccessible buildings and apartments, are you talking newer construction or older construction? Are you even talking with newer construction?
That's a good question. I'd like to find out more specific stats on it if any exists, but in my experience, we're talking about older construction, not the newer ones. I don't know if that's because I think it'd be harder for a newer construction site to actually get away with it, because I know that those inspections exist and I know that it'd be harder to break those standards. For the older ones, I'm not sure if that's because there has been a lack of enforcement or not. And I'm not going crazy here. I'm not saying that that they're breaking, that every single building needs an elevator. I'm not going crazy here on that specific issue, but it's more the two cases that I referred to earlier were about parking. And those are easy fixes if the city took action on it. I live in an apartment. I have a neighbor who is one of the individuals I've heard from who is a veteran with a disability, and they have to often walk a lot further than they need to, and they brought it up with the office. They didn't do anything about it. I called the office. They didn't do anything about it. So I'm going to make a note now to call someone else as well, because that just shouldn't happen. And if offices, landlord offices and companies are out there refusing that or not addressing it, then that's, I think, where the city can step in and connect them with the right people. But I think that neighbor of mine, who knows I'm running and has admitted I've never voted for anyone else locally in my life, if we connected with folks, had those identifiers that we referenced earlier, and connected them to the city offices so that they know who to call, there'd be a lot more collaboration on smaller issues like that. But yeah, I mean, overall, I'm talking more about parking and not that those aren't serious issues, but I'm not referring to 24-story buildings without an elevator.
All right. Any questions? We still got some time left here. Isaac, do you know on the flow for tonight? Is there a wrap up after the forums, or does the event? I forgot to ask that question. Did I lose my guy?
They're like, I'm out.
Wait, I'm muted. So sorry. But my answer was, I don't
stepped
know
away.
anyway. My answer was still, I don't know. So I'm still no help.
I don't want to hold anyone's time either. I know we've covered a lot.
No, I want to make sure that y'all don't miss out on anything that happens after this. Isaac, do you mind checking in with Melanie
I sure can.
and finding out? We don't need to just sit here and look. I do have a question for you, since we have the time and space to do this. Tell me a little about what your long-term goals are. Not just a little bit about your career. I know you answered a lot of questions before this, but tell us a little bit about your background, as far as what's made you want to get involved. Again, I know you talked to us about that, but then your ambitions beyond that. If you are able to serve on the city council for those number of terms, then what are your goals after that?
Sure. Well, that's the first time I've had that question, and I'm happy to get a question more broad, because I also know in the past I attended a forum similar to this once, and someone got frustrated. They're like, we're people with disabilities, but we care about the other issues too, right? And so I definitely I appreciate that I can speak to something other than that as well. In terms of what I'm doing afterward, I have no clue. I'm passionate about organizing. I'm passionate about fair and equal representation. So I'm sure that will be on the forefront no matter what happens. I didn't plan on running anytime soon. It was really, I was up working on the Biden campaign up in Iowa during the caucuses, and then Dallas during the primaries, when the when the pandemic started to come to our doorstep. And it made me realize that with the effects that we're going through now and will continue to go through for some time, a lot of folks out there, a lot of families out there in particular, are struggling and are going to continue to struggle. And it made me think back on the last recession and growing up watching my parents struggle with that, both economically and in terms of the family dynamic. We went through a lot. My parents fought hard to stay afloat. My dad, a retired Army officer, if it weren't for that retirement check, we wouldn't have made it. And a lot of families are going through that. So it made me realize I can be of service here. This is what I'm passionate about. There are a lot of issues that need to be addressed. And that's why we're running, I believe, the most solution-oriented platform based on the community that I've spoken with for going on 10 months now. COVID relief and recovery for working people who have been without a job for months on end. Housing first policies to address permanent resources for homeless residents. We keep throwing a Band-Aid at these problems instead of permanently working to solve them and prevent them from getting worse. And a whole range of other issues I'm not going to go into right now because you didn't ask about those. But the point is, I feel that we need a new generation of leadership that is willing to listen to people. And when I go to the doors, I'm not giving a spiel. I'm asking, what are you going through? What is something in your neighborhood that you think needs to be addressed? What are the issues in the city that you that have been on your mind, especially during this challenging year that we've had? So I get a lot out of that conversation. And I think people need to be heard. That's the purpose of representation. So that's what I'm focusing on now. Should I get elected, I'm not focused on anything other than that. I have no other aspirations right this minute to run for another office, to do anything else, because I think that that's something else that's been broken for some time. People are eager to get, to climb the ladder, and they're not focusing on what they can be successful at in their time, as an elected at that level. So, I mean, honestly, I'd like to show that even if I were to serve for 2 years, I got something done, rather than to keep waiting on issues that are convenient to get elected and reelected, just to climb that ladder and have nothing done.
Great. Thank you.
I'm sorry, that was probably more than 2 minutes. I apologize.
No, that's fine. We had more than 2 minutes. We had more than
Okay, so the last question is essentially an invite to revisit any topic that you'd like to speak more on for a minute.
We're getting very creative here.
Yes.
So the one thing I didn't hit on is representation specific to boards and commissions. One of my commitments to folks living with a disability is to have you actually be a voice on commissions and boards. If I have an option to, if there's someone out there that wants to be a voice for the community on a certain issue, I think that that's important. I think that representation is absolutely important. So that's really all I would have to add. I do think we covered a lot more, and I hope that everyone got to see the answers provided in the questionnaire. I know I filled that out. I know some other friends who are candidates who don't always fill out their own questionnaires, but if you are interested in taking a look, they're a little more eloquent than perhaps some of my answers tonight. But representation's key. You referenced younger people with a disability who may be looking at the process, or feeling like they're not seeing much happen. I think that's where we start, by having that initial conversation. What do we need to be doing that we're not currently doing? And that's how it is in the military too. You go into a staff meeting, you evaluate what the situation is and what we need to do to confront it, not presume the answers to the problem before we even really understand the problem.
Great, thank you. I am saving our chat here. Well, I thought I was saving our chat. Isaac, you may have to help me with that.
Something tells me you might have to stop recording first.
Oh, okay. Well, I am going to thank Mr. Gregory, and in absentia, thank Mr. Johnson for being here. This was very, very informative. You both had, great responses and indicated a lot of knowledge about what's going on in the community and a willingness to learn more. And we really appreciate that very much. Want to thank our participants who are with us. I know that we had a few that were with us and saw in the chat that some had to leave. So appreciate that, and hope y'all will continue to participate in the Conversation 360s. There are more coming up, so please be sure and check the Disability SA website for those, and stay involved. So, thank you. And again, want to thank our interpreters so much for being here. These forums will be available to the general community to see, and that goes a long way toward making them accessible to everyone. So really appreciate your assistance on that tonight. So thank you and have a wonderful evening.